America learned to keep time from them, from a cowboy troubadour who tuned his guitar to open skies, from a soul matriarch whose alto turned bruises into brass, from a golden tenor comet that once crackled through transistor radios, from a songwriter who helped bolt the spine of Layla, from the last alchemist of the band coaxing weather out of wooden wires, Randy Boone, Angie Stone, Lou Christie, Bobby Whitlock, Garth Hudson. This week, the stagehands of history pulled 5 quiet switches. What remains is not a headline, but a residue, the scent of sawdust after a curtain drop, the hum of an organ in an empty church, the echo of a chorus that refuses to resolve. We don't measure loss by numbers here. We listen for fingerprints on riffs and rolls on jukebox glass and prairie light. 5 lives, 5 last acts, and a single through-line devotion to craft long after applause thinned. Before we name the dates and the details, pause with me. Let the room settle. Now, lean in and hear what still plays when the spotlight clicks dark. He entered American living rooms as if he'd always belonged there. A lanky North Carolinian with a guitar and an easy grin, the ranch hand whose songs softened the edges of a hard country. As Randy Benton on NBC's long-running Western, The Virginian, 1964-66, Randy Boone became the show's singing conscience, riding his own horse and folding music into the drama without breaking its spell. Before that, he'd learned his marks on It's a Man's World, and he'd brushed the outer limits of the medium with a turn in the Twilight Zone. The seventh is made up of phantoms. The range suited him: campfire picker, earnest drifter, young reporter, and CBS's Cimarron strip characters who felt carved from the same timber as the songs he wrote. Off-screen, the music kept pace, a solo LP, Ramblin' Randy. 1965, and a duet set with co-star Roberta Shore captured the warm, unhurried phrasing fans heard each week. If Boone never chased stardom as loudly as some of his peers, he stamped a quieter legacy, proving that in the heyday of primetime westerns, understatement could still fill the frame, and a well-placed melody could carry a scene farther than a gun ever could. Fame loosened its grip on Randy Boone, the way a good sunset fades slowly without fuss. After a last round of screen credits in the mid-1980s, an appearance on Highway to Heaven, and a role in the 1987 film The Wild Pair, he stepped away from the casting calls that had once shaped his weeks. The pivot was practical and proud. Boone moved into construction work by the late 80s, trading marks and microphones for lumber and deadlines, the kind of second act that keeps a man's hands honest. Friends and former colleagues remembered that choice not as retreat, but as temperament. He had always carried himself like a working musician who happened to be on television a craftsman before he was a face. The music, of course, never left. It rarely does for people who learn to live by chord changes. Boone kept a guitar close, playing small rooms and private gatherings when it suited him, letting songs do what they had always done, bridge the distance between a life and its listeners. In tributes shared by those who knew him, the words humble, soft-spoken, and kind recur as if the man who once sang to millions had managed to keep the best parts of anonymity, unhurried talk, eye contact, time to listen. There is a certain courage in redefining success when the marquee dims. In Boone's case, the final decades read like an ethic stay, useful stay, musical stay, decent. The cowboy troubadour who once threaded melodies through primetime westerns proved that legacy isn't measured only by credits or chart lines. Sometimes it's measured by the quiet way a person keeps showing up for the job, for the song, for the people who remember. Randy Boone's last day entered the record not through a scene or a stage cue, but through a family confirmation. On Thursday, August 28, 2025, his wife Lana told The Hollywood Reporter that Boone had died at 83. She declined to share further details. In the days that followed, news outlets repeated the same restraint, a small circle of privacy holding around a man whose performances once reached millions. What we can say with certainty is simple and sufficient: he is gone. And those who worked with him remember the gentleness that framed the work, the eye contact, the unhurried talk, the way a song could lower the room's shoulders before a take. Fans filled obituary notices and comment threads with gratitude and fragments of memory. A campfire tune on the Virginian, a scene in Cimarron's strip, the warmth of his duet recordings. The absence of a cause does not dim the outline he leaves. If anything, it restores proportion. The final moments remain his. The legacy is ours to hold a guitar within reach, a voice pitched to kindness, and a craftsman's quiet exit from the lights. Randy Boone's most durable legacy is the way he braided song into story until they felt inseparable. As Randy Benton on NBC's The Virginian, he didn't just hold a guitar on camera, he let music carry plot and feeling, giving a primetime Western a quiet musical conscience that fans still recall. Off-screen, he preserved that voice in the studio with the 1965 LP Ramblin' Randy, and a Decca duet album with co-star Roberta Shore, evidence that his appeal wasn't a TV trick, but a musician's center of gravity. Later, when the credits thinned, he chose a craftsman's life in construction, a decision that reads less like retreat than clarity work. Well, stay kind, keep a song within reach. What remains then is a composite portrait, the ranch hand who could lower a room's shoulders with a verse the colleague remembered for humility. The actor-singer who showed that understatement could carry a scene farther than bravado. For viewers who grew up with The Virginian or found it in syndication, the memory arrives in small flashes, a campfire chorus, the ease of his phrasing, the way presence can be felt without raising its voice. That is a difficult thing to teach and the hardest thing to fake. It is why Randy Boone still feels present in the spaces he once filled, a reminder that craft tended patiently outlives the lights that first revealed it. She entered the story twice first as Angie B. with the pioneering hip-hop trio. The sequence then as the velvet-grained alto who helped define late 90s neo-soul. Born Angela Laverne Brown in South Carolina, Stone learned to fuse church phrasing with street corner cadence, an instinct that powered the sequence's 1979 single Funk You Up, one of the first charting rap records by a female group. In the 1990s, she pivoted through Vertical Hold and into a solo run that sounded timeless. On arrival, Black Diamond, 1999, introduced the aching lift of No More Rain, In This Cloud, and Mahogany. Soul, 2001, sealed the reputation with Wish I Didn't Miss You, a heartbreak classic that seemed to breathe in 4/4. Along the way, she wrote, arranged, and sang beside heavyweights from D'Angelo to Alicia Keys, yet kept the center of gravity in the song, not the spotlight. To audiences, she was a maker of durable feeling, grooves with spine melodies that carried weight lyrics that told the truth without raising their voice. Before we reach the final chapter, it helps to remember the beginning, a writer-singer who treated craft like devotion and turned lived experience into records that still feel honest in the present tense. In her final stretch, Angie Stone treated legacy as a living verb. She kept making records that felt hand-stitched to her voice, most recently. Love Language 2023. A compact set that paired seasoned warmth with clean present tense writing and collaborations that honored her circle. Critics heard the familiar ballast, Southern R&B grain, Philly soul, shimmer, and noted how the slight weathering in her tone only deepened the truth she liked to sing. Recognition met the work. In June 2024, Stone was inducted into the Women's Songwriters Hall of Fame, a formal nod to a career that ran from the sequence's Funk You Up through neo-soul's classic run and into her late-period partnerships. The honor landed like a correction long overdue, and Stone leaned into it, touring Talking Shop and reminding younger artists how arrangement and restraint could make a groove breathe. The calendar for early 2025 looked busy by design. Stone was on the road across the Southeast, still headlining civic galas and theater stages, where a tight band could let Wish I Didn't Miss You bloom from a whisper to a room-wide sing-along. On the Friday night before she died, she performed at the Grand Marshals Ball in Mobile, Alabama, a clip that would circulate later, half celebration and half benediction. Hours after that show, while traveling north from Montgomery, Alabama, a crash ended her life at 63 News, confirmed by family and her publicist, and reported by major outlets. The detail that she was the only fatality in the collision brought both relief for her crew and a sharper ache to the loss. Mourning traveled quickly. AP and national papers carried tributes. Fans gathered for a celebration of life in Austell, Georgia. Then a service in Columbia, South Carolina, where she'd first learned to turn church phrasing into secular balm. The remembrances converged on the same portrait artist mentor, mother whose late career seasons were marked by steadiness. New songs when they were ready, stages tended with care, and a through line of faith that kept the work anchored. In the small hours of Saturday, March 1st, 2025, Angie Stone's tour, van a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter overturned on Interstate 65 just south of Montgomery, Alabama, and was then struck by a tractor trailer. Stone was pronounced dead at the scene. Several others in the van were injured and hospitalized, authorities said. She was 63. Hours earlier, she had performed at the Mobile Area Mardi Gras Association's Grand Marshals Ball. The group confirmed her appearance. Local reports and her team said she was traveling on to commitments up the coast, including CIAA tournament festivities that weekend. The blunt mechanics of the crash and overturn a second impact emergency lights on the shoulder stand in painful contrast to the steadiness of her late career presence. Even in initial statements, the emphasis fell less on spectacle than on the people who loved her colleagues, who called her a mentor family, who asked for prayers, fans who posted phone clips from the night before. That is how the final minutes have been held in public, not as a tabloid tableau, but as a threshold between work well done and the silence that follows. In that silence, the contours of her gifts sharpen the alto that could carry ache without breaking the songwriter's instinct for leaving space the faith that steadied everything around it. Angie Stone's legacy lives where church patience meets street wisdom and turns both into medicine. Long before neo-soul had a name, she modeled its grammar-unhurried pocket harmonies stacked like Pew's lyrics that insisted on dignity. As Angie B with the sequence, she helped write an early chapter of Women in Hip-Hop, proof that a female crew could claim charts and space without softening its stance. A generation later, she became one of neo-soul's clearest voices. The alto other singers calibrate to supple enough to caress a line, sturdy enough to carry weight. Her recordings endure because they solve for feeling and structure at once. Wish I Didn't Miss You keeps heartbreak walking by, giving sorrow a backbone. No More Rain. In this cloud finds weather inside a melody and lets it pass through you. On stage, she mentored as much as she performed band dynamics, arrangement choices, the difference between volume and presence. Off-stage peers described a maker who protected the song first and her spotlight second. What remains is a working definition of soul in the modern era, truth told at conversational volume, grooves that breathe, love and loss handled with adult restraint. Artists will keep borrowing her map, how to be current without chasing trend, how to be classic without turning to stone, because it was drawn from craft faith and a life lived in time with others. Born in Memphis and raised on the thrum of Stax Records, Bobby Whitlock carried gospel heat and bar band grit into every room he entered. Before most listeners knew his name, he'd logged miles with Delaney and Bonnie, learning how soul, blues, and rock could live inside the same breath. In 1970, he and Eric Clapton pulled those threads tight and formed Derek and the Dominos, a short-lived lightning in a bottle band, whose lone studio album became a landmark Layla and other assorted love songs. Whitlock wasn't just the Hammond behind the roar. He was a second voice at the mic and a writer at the table, co-authoring keystone cuts like Bell Bottom Blues, Tell the Truth, and Why Does Love Got to Be So Sad? The same year, he poured that touch into George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, helping give the record its cathedral-wide resonance. What set Whitlock apart wasn't virtuosity alone. It was how his Memphis-soaked phrasing met Clapton's fretboard confessions in a bruised human register. For a brief span, the music felt both basement raw and sky high, and Whitlock was in the engine room singing, writing, laying grain into the sound. After the feverish 1970s, Bobby Whitlock chose distance and dirt under the fingernails. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he largely stepped away from the circuit, retreating to a farm in Mississippi, where the days ran on weather instead of load-ins. That quiet gave him back a center. By 1999, he returned with new music, and in 2005, he married singer-multi-instrumentalist Coco Carmel. The partnership became a second act, with its own Light Records club dates and small room shows, where his gospel-bred phrasing could breathe. From 2006 to 2021, they lived in Austin, an obvious fit for a soul and roots craftsman, before moving west to Ozona, Texas, in search of more sky. In those later years, Whitlock's creative life widened, rather than narrowed. He painted seriously prolifically, and treated color the way he once treated harmony, as a way to reveal grain. Friends recalled canvases stacked along the walls. Museums took notice too, with an exhibit at the Crockett County Museum in 2022. The couple also invited fans into their living room via YouTube, posting conversations and performances that felt like a long after-show stories from the road songcraft talk, the kind of laughter that only band families know. It made his legacy less museum piece, more porch light, something you could still step into. Recognition kept finding him. He published a memoir in 2010, setting down the ride in his own unsanded voice. And in May 2024, Memphis marked the homecoming with a brass note on the Beale Street Walk of Fame. None of it changed his bearing. In interviews and on stage, he sounded like a man grateful to have survived the whirl, intent on tending the work while he still could. When the end came in Texas in August 2025, the narrative already felt complete, not a comeback so much as a reconciliation with the music, with the past, with the gifts he understood were on loan. The end came quietly, the way he'd lived his later years, close to home, close to the people who steadied him. In the early hours of Sunday, August 10th, 2025 at 1:20 a.m., Bobby Whitlock died at his home in Texas, surrounded by family, his manager said, calling it the close of a brief illness. Reports that followed confirmed what friends already knew. Illness had been the final opponent, and he faced it with the same stubborn grace that marked his best singing. CBS News reported the cause as cancer, a detail echoed in tributes across the industry. His wife, Coco Carmel Whitlock, chose words that felt like him, plain-spoken and luminous when she addressed the loss. "Life is what you make it, so take it and make it beautiful," she said, quoting the line he carried like a compass. In those first statements, you can trace the contours of a life that refused spectacle, a home, a family room, the quiet hour before dawn. The man who once poured gospel heat into stadium-sized blues left as he had returned in recent years through a smaller door with dignity. What remains is the echo his friends kept pointing to, that particular blend of humility and fire, the Memphis grain in his voice, the way a Hammond chord could make a room breathe. The last note is gone, the sustain is still with us. Bobby Whitlock's legacy lives in the seam where soul meets blues and refuses to choose. In Derek and the Dominos, he wasn't background color. He was co-architect's second voice at the mic. Hammond at full ache, a writer shaping songs that turned private confessions into shared anthems. The Dominos' lone studio album proved that grit and delicacy could coexist at stadium volume. And Whitlock carried the same weathered tenderness into sessions with friends who trusted his ear. What listeners kept from him was not virtuosity alone, but moral grain, that Memphis timbre which made even the loudest music feel human-scaled. His later years gave that grain room to breathe. With Coco Carmel, he favored small stages, eye-level stories, and living room broadcasts that made history feel close enough to ask questions. He painted with the same instinct for tone layering color like harmony until a surface hummed. Honors arrived, but the truer testament was the way working musicians spoke his name with gratitude, as if a door had once opened and never quite closed. If you strip away myth, what remains is a craftsman's pledge: show up, tell the truth, serve the song. That vow threads through the records, the canvases, the conversations, and keeps echoing now that the voice is gone. Before Americana had a name, Garth Hudson was already giving it weather. The Canadian multi-instrumentalist of the band organist first, but also pianist, accordionist, saxophonist, turned folk and R&B into something cathedral-sized yet handmade. Trained in classical and church music, he favored a Lowrey organ whose reeds and filters let him paint in unfamiliar colors. A chapel hush, hear a carnival blur their thunder when the song asks for it. With Bob Dylan first as a hawk and then in the basement tapes era, Hudson learned how to make the unpredictable feel inevitable. With the band on music from Big Pink and the Brown album, he helped design arrangements that sounded both ancient and freshly discovered. What listeners remember first is often a prelude. The genetic method, his free-form invocation that spills into chest fever, a live rite where hymnal chords fracture into funk and drift back toward the blues. But the quieter feats tell the truer story, counter melodies that rescue verses left-hand figures, that shore up Levon Helm's backbeat voicings that make three singers sound like a small town's worth of memory. He was the group's secret inventor, the one who could turn a waltz crooked or straighten a lament without drawing attention to the trick. If the band taught America to hear its own past with new ears, Garth Hudson was the teacher at the blackboard drawing staves no one had seen before. In his later decades, Garth Hudson withdrew from the certainty of touring and chose a life measured by quieter rooms. He and his wife, the singer Maud Hudson, settled in the Hudson Valley. After she died in 2022, friends and colleagues described a man who kept his circle small and his music close. On stage, appearances grew rarer, replaced by the occasional solo performance, where he could unspool hymnal chords, ragtime left hands, and sudden weather changes on his Lowrey, proof that his palette hadn't dimmed, only narrowed to the essentials. Hudson never framed hardship as a headline, but it left marks. Wildfires destroyed his Malibu ranch and studio in 1978. Later came bankruptcies, and in 2013 the lost then fight to regain parts of his archives after a storage space dispute. The stories seemed at odds with his reputation as a musician's musician, yet they tracked with a career spent serving songs over commerce. Even so, the work kept arriving. The solo set, The Sea to the North, 2001. A duo album with Maud live at the Wolf, 2005, and Garth Hudson presents a Canadian celebration of the band. 2010, a communal salute that doubled as a statement of artistic citizenship. Recognition found him without changing his nature. He entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1994 with the band, and shared a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008. But honors mostly confirmed what musicians already knew, that his counter-melodies could rescue. Versus his voicings could widen a chorus without raising the volume. In interviews, he treated style like language, fluent across idioms, but loyal to the song. By the 2020s, he was living in a nursing facility in Woodstock, New York, where the days slowed to conversation visitors, and by more than one account, hand-holding and music. When friends spoke of him, then they reached for the same words they used for his playing patient, precise kind. The public part of the story had narrowed, yes, but the private one kept its compass. Keep the instrument close. Keep the listening closer. The news arrived on January 21st, 2025. Garth Hudson, 87, had died in his sleep at a nursing home in Woodstock, New York. Reports were consistent on what mattered: peaceful, private, and close to the place that had sheltered so much of his music. Colleagues confirmed the setting. Obituaries noted that he had been the last surviving member of the band, the quiet architect whose Lowrey organ once made roots. Music feel newly discovered. Details stayed gentle by design. There was no spectacle to narrate, only the room and the witnesses. A longtime friend described the eve of his passing as a day of music and hand-holding a phrase that sounds exactly like the life he kept careful communal tune to touch. The time of day scarcely matters when the measure is musical. What remains is the way he left, like a coda resolving to calm. Fans and fellow players answered with the obvious hymns, The Wait Up on Cripple Creek, Chest Fever, and with quieter stories about kindness. Backstage precision in the studio, patience at the piano. In the space where causes and timelines usually crowd, In Hudson's Exit offered a different lesson. Sometimes the last gesture is simply rest, and the truest biography is what the music still knows how to do. Garth Hudson's legacy is a lesson in how to widen a song without crowding it. He treated keyboards as architecture foundations, windows hidden corridors, so singers could move freely and drummers could breathe. The famous flourishes are easy to name: the whirling prelude that ignites chest fever, the reed-bright Lowry voices that could turn a barroom story into a procession. But the deeper gift was an ethic serve. The song disguised the work, let harmony do the heavy lifting. He practiced musical empathy at orchestral scale. Because of him, generations of roots musicians learned to hear space as an instrument. You can trace his touch in the way bands now stack organ and piano, in the quiet counterlines that rescue a verse in the patience of a solo that refuses to shout. Engineers still solo the Hammond track to study his voicings. Arrangers still borrow his habit of placing surprise where the ear expects habit. What friends remember matches what the records teach: patience, precision, kindness. In grief, that combination reads like a map. If the band helped America recognize its own older songs, Hudson helped it trust that the past could sound newly discovered weather, rolling in from a familiar horizon and the light somehow different. He arrived from Pittsburgh with a church-trained voice and a daredevil falsetto that could vault from streetlight romance to siren-loud drama in a breath. Born Luigi Alfredo Giovanni Sacco, he teamed with pianist mystic Twyla Herbert as a teen, and the pair wrote a stack of songs that gave Lou Christie his signature arc. Yearning verses, sky-high choruses, and the feeling that young love could flip the weather. Early hits like The Gypsy Cried and Two Faces. Have I Put His Name on national charts? Then Lightnin Strikes hit #1 in 1966, a thunderclap of strings, hand claps, and that stratospheric lead. He kept pushing, even when it cost him spins. Rhapsody in the Rain was banned on some stations for being too candid, but the controversy only underlined what he did best: turn teenage stakes into operatic pop. After a brief detour for military service, he resurfaced with I'm Gonna Make You Mine. 1969 proof, the voice still carried across shifting eras. What made Christie more than a novelty was craft the disciplined phrasing under the theatrics, the Herbert co-writes that fit his range like a tailored suit, the Pittsburgh grit beneath the gloss. He didn't just chase high notes, he built cathedrals for them. In the decades after his 60s chart run, Lou Christie refused to shrink to a memory. He kept a suitcase by the door, and his falsetto in fighting trim, working a circuit of theaters, fairs, and oldies packages where the songs still cracked open rooms. The point wasn't nostalgia alone, it was stewardship. He treated Lightnin Strikes 2, Faces Have I, and The Gypsy Cried like living things re-energized nightly, not embalmed. He also kept recording when he had something to add, releasing new music as late as 2015, proof that the studio still felt like a workshop and not a shrine. Away from the spotlight, Christie built a life that looked a lot like the neighborhoods that first believed in him. For years, he was a familiar face in Hell's Kitchen, a neighbor who would talk music in a deli line and wave from West 47th Street the pop star as good tenant and local historian. Even fans who mainly knew the high notes tended to mention the handshake, gracious unrushed the opposite of a hurried autograph. What deepened in the 2000s and 2010s was his sense of lineage. He often praised his teenage collaborator, Twyla Herbert, the classically trained pianist who had helped him shape those volcanic choruses, as a reminder that pop miracles happen because partners labor over craft. And when he told the story of Rhapsody in the Rain, he laughed about the bands and the clean re-record taking pride, not in scandal, but in the fact that honest teenage emotion could still rattle the culture and climb the charts anyway. By June 2025, Christie was still in conversation with his audience, posting to Facebook on June 15th, and still regarded in his hometown press and national obits as a working artist rather than a retired legend. That was his quiet victory longevity without complacency, a career that kept choosing the present tense. In mid-June 2025, the man who once sent teenage hearts vaulting with a single falsetto, Glide slipped away at home in Pittsburgh after a brief illness, his family said. Multiple outlets carried the news. His wife Francesca confirmed the passing to reporters, noting that it happened at home. Some reports fixed the date as June 18th, while people cited June 17th, a small discrepancy that changes no part of the loss, but reflects how quickly tributes traveled that week. What remained consistent was the picture of a beloved singer in his early 80s, tended by family, closing a life that never really left the stage. Friends and fans filled timelines with clips: Lightnin Strikes, Two Faces, Have I, The Gypsy Cried, and with small stories from lobbies and sidewalks. A handshake on West 47th Street, a kind word in a deli line, a quick laugh before sound check. The cause was described simply as an illness. The tone of the remembrances was anything but simple. It sounded like gratitude toward a singer who kept choosing the present tense, who would still aim for the ceiling on a county fair night and hit it true. In the quiet that follows, you can almost hear the string stabs and hand claps again. Not as nostalgia, but as muscle memory, the way a room knows when Lou Christie is about to go for the note, and how it holds its breath until he does. Lou Christie's legacy isn't just a stack of singles. It's a feeling how a pop song can vault from sidewalk to sky in 8 bars and come back with your heartbeat. His falsetto, famously airborne, worked because it had ballast underneath precise diction-elastic phrasing and arrangements that treated teenage stakes with adult craft. With songwriter-pianist Twyla Herbert, he proved that dramatic needn't mean disposable. The choruses hit hard because the verses were built like bridges. His records now play like a map of American youth culture at full tilt. Street corner harmonies graduating to orchestral sweep innocence, arguing with impulse joy, refusing to apologize for its volume. On stage, even late in life, he honored that map. The shows carried less swagger than stewardship tempos, nudged alive key changes, taken clean banter trimmed to make room for the notes fans came to hear. What endures is the permission he gave to sing high, without flinching to risk sentiment, if the craft is sturdy to make pop that's unabashed and built to last. You can hear his echo whenever a modern singer dares a skyward line and lands it. The high note was never a stunt in his hands. It was a promise that the moment could bear more feeling than we thought. Some farewells are loud. These were steady. A cowboy's melody threaded through a primetime frontier. A soul matriarch turned ache into lift. A golden tenor sent romance skyward. A Memphis-grained craftsman carried confessions into anthem. And an organ alchemist widened silence into light. Their names are less a list than a map of how we listen. If their last notes have faded, the sustain is ours. The chorus you hum, without thinking, the scene that loosens your shoulders, the chord that knows where you've been. Tell us the moment you carry, song, episode, or story, and why it stays. If this tribute met you where you live, share it with someone who loved these voices. Subscribe for the next remembrance. Until then, hold the echo. Keep the room kind.